The red warning lights flashed across Dr. Marcus Chen's face as his small research vessel spun out of control. He had been chasing a strange signal through this unexplored sector of space when something went wrong with his engines. Now, as his ship plummeted toward an unknown planet, he could only hope his emergency landing systems would work. Come on, he muttered, pulling hard on the controls. The planet's atmosphere burned orange around his viewport. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering column, fighting against the gravitational forces that threatened to tear his ship apart. The ground rushed up to meet him. Trees, or something that looked like trees, spread out below in an endless carpet of purple-tinted vegetation. Marcus spotted a small clearing and aimed for it, knowing he would only get one chance at this landing. The impact came hard and fast. Metal screamed against metal as the ship's landing gear crumpled. Marcus's head slammed forward, then back against his seat. Everything went dark for a moment. When he opened his eyes, smoke was filling the cabin. The emergency systems beeped weakly, warning him about multiple system failures. Marcus unbuckled his harness with shaking hands and grabbed his emergency pack. He had to get out before the ship's power core became unstable. The exit hatch groaned as he forced it open. Fresh air rushed in, sweet and strangely thick. Marcus jumped down from the ship, surprised when he landed more lightly than he expected. The gravity here must be lower than Earth's, he realized. His scientific mind started working immediately, even as he stumbled away from his smoking ship. The air was breathable, though it had an unusual floral scent. The purple plants around him reached higher into the sky than any trees he'd seen on Earth, their trunks thick as buildings. Small creatures that looked like glowing butterflies drifted between the branches. "At least I'm not dead," Marcus said to himself, checking his handheld scanner. The device was damaged, but still working. It showed breathable atmosphere levels and no immediate threats. The strange signal that had led him here was stronger now, coming from somewhere to the east. That's when he heard it, a rustling in the massive purple foliage. Marcus turned slowly, his heart pounding. He wasn't alone. A figure emerged from between the tree-like plants, and Marcus's jaw dropped. It was a woman, but unlike any woman he'd ever seen. She stood at least 9 feet tall, her skin shimmering with a subtle iridescence that reminded him of mother of pearl. Her features were humanoid but exotic, with large almond-shaped eyes that glowed with an inner light. Her hair floated around her head, as if suspended in water, despite the lack of wind. She was dressed in what appeared to be living armor, plates of organic material that shifted and moved with her body. In her hand, she held some kind of staff that hummed with energy. More figures emerged behind her, all women, all equally tall and striking. They moved with incredible grace despite their size, as if the lower gravity was natural to them. Their expressions showed not hostility, but intense curiosity. The first woman stepped forward, towering over Marcus. She knelt down to examine him more closely, still staying taller than him even while kneeling. Her eyes widened as she studied his features. She said something in a musical language he didn't understand, but her tone was full of wonder. Marcus stood his ground, forcing himself to breathe normally. His years of xenobiology training kicked in. First contact situations were delicate. He raised his empty hands slowly, showing he carried no weapons. "Hello," he said clearly, hoping his universal translator would start working soon. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chen from Earth. I come in peace." The giant woman reached out one graceful hand and gently touched his cheek, as if making sure he was real. Her skin was warm, and a slight electric tingle passed between them at the contact. She smiled, and in that moment, Marcus knew his life would never be the same again. Marcus found himself being led through a city unlike anything he had ever seen. The buildings were alive, literally growing from the ground up, with walls made of the same purple plant material as the forest trees. They twisted upward into the sky, connected by bridges. 1 week into his stay with the Avalori, Marcus sat in their medical chamber as crystal machines scanned his body. The room hummed with energy as Zara and 2 other scientists studied the readings. Everything in their world seemed to blur the line between technology and nature. "Your DNA structure is fascinating," Zara said, her iridescent skin glowing brighter with excitement. "It's more adaptable than ours. Your species evolved to survive many different environments." Marcus watched the floating displays showing his genetic code next to an Avalori's. "On Earth, we had to adapt to survive. We didn't have your advanced biotechnology." The past week had been eye-opening. The Avalori could grow anything they needed. Their homes, their tools, even their clothes were alive and responding to their needs. But this amazing technology couldn't solve their biggest problem. "Look at this," one of the other scientists said, pointing to a pattern in the display. "The human's reproductive cells show promising compatibility with our crystallization process." Zara moved closer to Marcus, her presence now familiar and comforting despite her towering height. "We need to run more tests," she said. "But this is the first hope we've had in years." After the medical tests, Zara took Marcus on his daily tour of the city. They had fallen into this routine. Mornings for scientific work, afternoons for cultural exchange. Marcus was learning their ways while teaching them about Earth. They stopped at a garden where young Avalori were teaching crystal plants to grow into specific shapes. "Our children," Zara said sadly. "The last generation born before the sun's changes. Without a solution, they will be our last." Marcus watched the children, who were still taller than him despite their young age. "Tell me more about how your reproduction used to work," he said. "Maybe understanding the old way will help us find a new one." Zara led him to a quiet spot beneath a canopy of glowing leaves. "We would gather solar energy in special crystals," she explained. "When the crystals contained enough power, we could use them to spark new life from 2 Avalori's combined genetic material." But now, she touched a crystal hanging around her neck. "The energy is wrong. The spark won't catch." "Like trying to start a fire with wet wood," Marcus said, thinking out loud. "But what if we could change the type of spark?" Zara's eyes lit up with interest. "What do you mean?" "On Earth, we have animals that evolved different reproductive methods when their environments changed. Maybe we could." A sudden commotion interrupted them. A group of Avalori were gathering nearby, their voices raised in argument. At their center stood Naira, a council member known for her opposition to working with Marcus. "Look at him," Naira was saying, pointing at Marcus. "Barely half our size. Primitive. And you want to mix his genes with ours? We should find another way." Zara stepped forward, placing herself between Marcus and the growing crowd. "His primitive genes might save us all, Naira. Or would you prefer our species die pure?" The tension in the air was thick. Marcus noticed how some Avalori nodded at Naira's words, while others looked ashamed. The city might look perfect on the surface, but fear was dividing its people. "Maybe I can help," Marcus said, stepping around Zara. Despite being the shortest person present, he kept his voice steady. "On Earth, we learned that diversity makes a species stronger. New genetic combinations help life adapt and survive. You don't have to become like humans. You just need to learn from our ability to change." His words seemed to calm the crowd. Even Nira looked thoughtful, though she still frowned at him. Later, as the city's bioluminescent lights came on for the evening, Zara walked Marcus back to his quarters. "That was brave," she said, "standing up to them." "I meant what I said," Marcus replied. Change doesn't mean losing who you are. Sometimes it means becoming something better. Zara smiled down at him, her skin patterns shifting with emotion. Perhaps that's why the stars send you to us, Marcus Chen, to help us change without losing ourselves. Marcus woke up in the middle of the night to flashing lights and alarms. The living walls of his room pulsed with warning patterns. Something was wrong in the medical chamber where they kept his DNA samples. He rushed out, his smaller size and earth-trained muscles, letting him move quickly despite the lower gravity. When he reached the medical chamber, he found chaos. The crystal machines were sparking with unstable energy, and several storage units had been destroyed. The samples, Zara cried out when she saw him. Her usual graceful movements were panicked. Someone has sabotaged our research. Marcus looked around the room with careful eyes. 3 months of work, dozens of tests, all potentially ruined. But something didn't feel right about the scene. This wasn't a simple attack, he said, moving closer to examine the damaged machines. Look at how precise the damage is. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Several council members arrived, including Mira. She looked at the destruction with an expression Marcus couldn't read. Perhaps this is a sign, she said, that we should not meddle with foreign DNA. But Marcus wasn't listening. His smaller size let him squeeze into spaces the Avalori couldn't reach. Behind one of the main crystal processors, he found something interesting. A small device attached to the power core. Look at this, he called out. It's redirecting energy from your machines. This wasn't about destroying our work. Someone's stealing it. Zara knelt down to see what he had found. That's impossible. Only council members have access to this level of technology. Exactly, Marcus said, his mind racing. And who would want both to stop our research and steal it at the same time? Guards arrived, their living armor glowing with alert patterns. Marcus noticed how they positioned themselves around Nera protectively. Then he saw something that made his eyes widen. A crystal around one guard's neck, pulsing with the same energy pattern as the stolen research data. It's not Nera, Marcus said suddenly, surprising everyone. She's been opposing me openly. Why would she need to steal anything? It's them, he pointed at the guards. They're from the Military Science Division, aren't they? The guards' expressions changed. One of them moved with shocking speed, grabbing Zara and holding an energy weapon to her head. Stay back, she ordered. We're doing what's necessary for our people's survival. By stealing research. Zara struggled in the guard's grip. You're betraying everything we stand for. We're creating a backup plan, the guard said. One that doesn't rely on this human's primitive genetics. One that keeps our bloodlines pure. Marcus watched them carefully. The Avalori were stronger than him, but he had spent weeks studying their technology. He noticed how the stolen research was being channeled through their crystals. You don't understand human DNA very well, do you? He asked calmly, moving slowly toward a control panel. It's not as primitive as you think. For example, he pressed a sequence of buttons quickly. It adapts. The crystals around the guards' necks suddenly pulsed with chaotic energy. The stolen research data had been corrupted by Marcus's understanding of human genetic stability. The guards dropped their weapons, struggling to contain the unstable energy. Zara broke free and quickly subdued her captor. Other Avalori rushed in to arrest the conspirators. The crisis was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Later, as they cleaned up the medical chamber, Nera approached Marcus. I was wrong about you, she admitted. Your different perspective saved us today. Perhaps there is wisdom in change after all. Zara helped Marcus repair one of the crystal machines. How did you know what to do? She asked. Marcus smiled. Humans had to learn to think creatively to survive on Earth. Sometimes being smaller means you have to be smarter. He looked at the damaged equipment. We lost some progress, but we can start again. Together. Zara's skin glowed with warm colors. Together, she agreed, and this time when she looked at him, Marcus saw something more than scientific curiosity in her eyes. 4 months into his stay with the Avalori, Marcus stood before the High Council. The massive chamber was packed with observers, their iridescent skin creating a beautiful light show of nervous energy. The test results floated in the air around them, showing success after success. The combination of human DNA with our crystallization process works, Zara announced to the council. Her voice carried both joy and uncertainty. We can create new life. Our species can survive. The eldest council member leaned forward in her living throne. Then we must discuss the terms, Dr. Marcus Chen. Our survival now depends on you. Marcus felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. He had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it easier. Zara stood nearby, her usual confident posture showing signs of worry. To maintain genetic diversity, another council member said, we would need you to stay permanently. To father a new generation of Avalori children. Our studies show we would need at least 20 years of genetic samples. The room fell silent. 20 years. A large part of his life. There's more, Zara added softly. The process requires personal involvement. The genetic material must be fresh, combined with the crystal energy at the moment of collection. Her skin flushed with embarrassment colors. Marcus understood what they weren't saying directly. They needed him to father children with multiple Avalori women regularly for 20 years. Part of him, the part that had grown to love their beautiful world and culture, was tempted. He looked at Zara, seeing the complex emotions playing across her features. Over the past months, their relationship had grown into something more than just scientific collaboration. But could he commit to staying here forever? I have duties back on Earth, he said carefully. Reports to file, discoveries to share. Your world is amazing, but it's not your home, Zara finished for him, her voice sad but understanding. An older Avalori stepped forward from the crowd. Then we are still doomed. All this work, all this hope, for nothing. No, Marcus said firmly. You're not doomed. Because you're thinking about this the wrong way. He walked to the center of the room, where the genetic displays floated. Look at what we've actually discovered here. He gestured, and the crystal technology responded to him now, showing new combinations of DNA structures. We've proven that human and Avalori genetics can work together. But we've also learned how to modify the crystallization process itself. We don't need 20 years of samples. Excited whispers filled the room. Zara moved closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her personal feelings. What are you suggesting? We can create a seed bank, Marcus explained. A carefully selected collection of genetic material, properly preserved in your crystal matrices. Combined with the modified crystallization process we've developed, it would give you centuries of genetic diversity. You wouldn't need me to stay permanently. The council members discussed among themselves, their skin patterns shifting with rapid thoughts. Finally, the eldest spoke again. And what of you, Dr. Chen? Would you leave us entirely? Marcus looked up at Zara, seeing hope returning to her glowing eyes. No, he said. I propose becoming an ambassador between our worlds. Regular visits, cultural exchange, scientific collaboration. The best of both worlds. Both worlds, Zara repeated softly, her hand finding his shoulder in that familiar gesture that now meant so much more. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some Avalori argued for the traditional approach, wanting him to stay permanently. Others saw the wisdom in his compromise. Through it all, Marcus stood firmly, his smaller size no longer seeming like a disadvantage among these giant women. "We must vote," the eldest council member announced. "But first, tell us truly, Dr. Chen, why offer this compromise?" Marcus smiled, looking around at the faces that had become so familiar. "Because sometimes love means knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Your people taught me that." The next week passed in a blur of activity. After the council accepted Marcus's compromise plan, the real work began. The massive laboratory chamber buzzed with energy as Avalori scientists worked alongside him, combining their crystal technology with his knowledge of human genetics. Careful with that sample, Marcus called out to a younger scientist. He was balanced on a specially made platform that let him work at the same height as the Avalori. The DNA strands need to be perfectly aligned with the crystal matrix. Zara worked beside him, her skilled hands manipulating the living technology. "It's amazing," she said, watching as human DNA merged successfully with their crystal energy. "We never thought to approach the problem this way." The process they had developed was revolutionary. Instead of requiring constant new genetic material, they could preserve and multiply the existing samples. The crystals would keep the DNA viable for hundreds of years. "Look," one of the scientists called out. In a special chamber, their first test was showing results. A small crystal glowed with combined human and Avalori energy, and within it, new life was beginning to form. Even Naira, who had once opposed Marcus's presence, came to watch. "It's beautiful," she admitted, her skin patterns showing wonder. "Different from our old way, but beautiful nonetheless." But not everyone was convinced. A group of traditionalists gathered outside the laboratory, their voices raised in protest. "Our children will be changed forever," they shouted. "They won't be pure Avalori." Marcus watched the crowd from a window, feeling worried. Then he felt Zora's warm hand on his shoulder. "They're afraid," she said softly. "Change is never easy." Marcus nodded, then straightened up. "I have an idea," he said, "but I'll need your help." The next day, they called a public demonstration. The laboratory's crystal walls turned transparent, letting everyone see inside. Marcus stood before the crowd, looking small but confident among the giant women. "You're right to be concerned," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered Avalori. "Your children will be different. They will be stronger." He gestured, and the crystal displays showed the new DNA structures. "Look at what we've created." Your natural ability to use crystal energy combined with human adaptability. Your children won't lose what makes them Avalori. They'll gain the ability to survive in a changing world. To demonstrate, he showed them the test results. The new embryos carried all the traditional Avalori traits: the height, the iridescent skin, the connection to crystal technology. But they also showed increased resistance to solar radiation changes and greater genetic stability. "Your sun is changing," Marcus continued. "Your world is changing. Life must change too, or it dies. That's not just human wisdom, it's universal truth." The crowd began to murmur with understanding. Zara stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "Marcus isn't changing who we are," she declared. "He's helping us become who we need to be." One by one, the protesters began to nod. Even the most traditional among them could see the wisdom in adaptation. The crisis that had threatened to divide their society began to heal. Later that evening, in the quiet of the laboratory, Marcus and Zara watched their successful embryo continue to grow. The crystal container pulsed with healthy energy, mixing blue human DNA patterns with the Avalori's iridescent glow. You know what this means. Zara asked, her eyes shining. We don't just have a way to survive, we have a way to thrive. Marcus smiled, reaching up to touch the crystal chamber. Life finds a way, he said. Humans learned that on Earth. Now the Avalori will learn it too. Zora's skin glowed with happiness colors. And you'll be here to see it. Sometimes at least. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Marcus said, then laughed at her confused expression. That's a human saying. It means yes, I'll definitely be here. 5 years had passed since Marcus's crash landing on the Avalori world. As his small Earth shuttle descended through the purple atmosphere, he smiled at the changes below. New crystal towers rose among the ancient ones, their designs blending human innovation with Avalori beauty. The landing pad was crowded with familiar faces. At the front stood Zara, her iridescent skin glowing with joy. Beside her was someone new. A young girl who stood 8 feet tall, her skin shimmering with both Avalori patterns and a distinctly human warmth. Uncle Marcus. The girl called out as he stepped from his ship. She was one of the first generation of new Avalori children, born from the combined genetics program. Her name was Aurora, and she had her mother Zara's grace with a curious spark that reminded Marcus of his own species. Look how you've grown. Marcus laughed as Aurora lifted him in an enthusiastic hug. His visits every few months meant he got to watch these children grow, each one a perfect blend of both worlds. The High Council had arranged a celebration for his arrival. The Great Chamber was filled with both pure Avalori and the new generation. Where once there had been fear of change, now there was pride in their adaptation. Tell us about Earth's response to our latest trade proposal, Zara asked as they walked through the crowd. She had become the head of their scientific council, leading the exchange of knowledge between worlds. They're amazed by your crystal technology, Marcus replied, especially its medical applications. Earth's hospitals are already testing the healing chambers we developed together. The celebration moved to the garden terraces, where young Avalori children played among the glowing plants. Some showed new traits, slight variations in height, different patterns of iridescence, but all carried the undeniable beauty and dignity of their race. Do you remember, Naira approached them, her once suspicious attitude long replaced by friendship, when we thought accepting human DNA would be the end of our culture. They watched as Aurora taught younger children how to communicate with the crystal plants. Her methods combined traditional Avalori techniques with creative human problem-solving. Instead, it was a new beginning. Zara said softly, "Our population is growing again. Our children are stronger, more adaptable, yet still uniquely Avalori." Marcus felt a familiar warmth as Zara's hand found his shoulder. Over the years, their relationship had evolved into something unique. Not quite human love, not quite Avalori bond, but a deep connection that bridged both their worlds. That evening, they gathered in the original medical chamber, now a museum of sorts. The first successful crystal matrix still glowed there, marking the moment when everything changed. The old stories, Aurora said, practicing her Earth languages with Marcus, say you were sent by the stars to save us. Is that true? Marcus smiled. I followed a signal and crashed here by accident. But maybe it wasn't accident at all. Maybe our species were meant to meet, to learn from each other. To grow together, Zara added, her skin patterns shifting with affection. Later, standing on a balcony under the changing lights of the Avalori sun, Marcus reflected on his journey. He had come here as a lost human, faced with a tribe of beautiful giant women asking for his help. He was leaving as a bridge between worlds, part of a legacy that would continue for generations. Will you come back soon? Aurora asked, hugging him goodbye. Of course, Marcus promised. This is my second home now." As his shuttle lifted off, Marcus watched Zara and Aurora waving below. The Avalori world had changed him as much as he had changed it. In saving their species, he had helped create something entirely new, a future where humanity's adaptability and the Avalori's ancient wisdom combined to reach for the stars together. Sometimes the greatest adventures, he thought, begin with a crash landing and a plea for help.